The rain hadn't let up in 3 days. It wasn't the kind of rain that made you want to curl up with coffee and a good book. It was the heavy, relentless kind that soaked through your coat before you even reached your car. The kind that turned the streets of downtown Chicago into dark mirrors reflecting neon signs and headlights. The kind of rain that felt like a warning. Cora Penning didn't have time for warnings. She was already 40 minutes into a double shift at Meridian General Hospital when the man collapsed in the lobby. Not a patient. He wasn't wearing a gown or clutching his chest the way sick people did on television. He was wearing a charcoal wool coat that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and he hit the polished floor hard. The kind of fall that happened when your legs simply stopped working, when your body decided it was done pretending. Cora was passing through the lobby with a tray of medication when she saw it happen. Most of the people around him took a step back. A few pulled out phones. The woman at the reception desk was already reaching for the phone to call a code. Cora set down the tray on the nearest surface and dropped to her knees beside him. "Hey!" She pressed 2 fingers against his neck. Pulse, strong but racing. "Can you hear me?" His eyes opened. They were dark gray, the color of the sky right before a thunderstorm, and they focused on her face with a sharpness that told her, even flat on his back on a hospital floor, this was not a man accustomed to being looked down at. "Don't move," she said. "You're in a hospital. You're safe." Something shifted in his expression. Not relief. More like confusion, as if the concept of being safe in a stranger's hands was entirely foreign to him. His name, she would learn later, was Carrick Malone. And nobody in the city of Chicago said that name at a normal volume. Now, let's back up, because you need to understand exactly who Carrick Malone was before you can understand why what happened next was so extraordinary. Carrick Malone was 41 years old, and he controlled the northwest corridor of Chicago's most powerful crime syndicate with the kind of quiet efficiency that made other men nervous. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply made decisions, and those decisions had a way of becoming reality with frightening speed. The Malone name meant different things to different people in this city. To city councilmen, it meant campaign contributions and careful favors. To rival organizations, it meant a boundary you did not cross. To the people who worked under him, it meant structure, loyalty, and a code that had kept the peace for over a decade. To Carrick himself, it meant a life that had swallowed everything else whole. He had no wife, no children. He'd had both, once, a marriage that lasted 4 years before the weight of who he was crushed it completely. A daughter who was 6 when her mother took her to Portland and made sure the distance was large enough to feel permanent. He hadn't fought it. That was the part that still stayed with him in the early mornings when he couldn't sleep. Not that she left, but that some part of him had known it was the right thing to let her go. His name was Sparrow. That was what he had called her, right from the start. From the moment the nurse placed her in his arms, and she blinked up at him with those dark, serious eyes that looked impossibly wise for someone only 4 hours old. She was small and fierce, and she tilted her head when she listened, exactly like a bird. Sparrow. His daughter's legal name was Natalie, but he had never once called her that. He hadn't spoken to her in 6 years. What had brought him to Meridian General that night was not his own health. It was a phone call. A brief, clipped call from a number he didn't recognize that said 2 sentences, and then disconnected. "Your daughter is in room 4 north. She's been asking for you." He'd driven, himself. Didn't call the detail. Didn't tell anyone where he was going. He walked into the lobby of Meridian General at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in November, and his body, which had been running on black coffee and adrenaline, and the particular kind of controlled tension that comes from living the way he lived, simply gave out. He'd been on his feet for 31 hours. Cora Penning, who was 26 years old and had been a nurse at Meridian for 2 years and had never once in her life heard the name Carrick Malone, held his wrist and counted his pulse and told him in a calm, steady voice that everything was going to be fine. He believed her. That was the strange part. He didn't know why, but he believed her. They got him to a room. Dehydration, low blood pressure, exhaustion. The attending physician read off the list with the mild disapproval of someone who had seen too many men ignore their bodies for too long. An IV was started. Vitals were monitored. By 1 a.m., Carrick Malone was sitting upright in a hospital bed with a blood pressure cuff on his arm, looking like a man who deeply resented being horizontal. Cora came in to check the IV line. "You need anything?" she asked. "Room 4 North," he said. "I need to know who's in room 4 North." She checked her tablet, looked up at him. "Are you family?" "I'm her father." Cora looked at him for a moment. His face was impossible to read. That was the thing about Carrick Malone, she would realize over time. Every emotion he felt went somewhere deep and internal before it had the chance to show on his face. But there was something in his eyes right now. Something that looked like a man standing at the edge of something he wasn't sure he deserved to step over. "Give me a few minutes," she said. She came back 15 minutes later, sat down in the chair next to his bed, which was an unusual thing for a nurse on a busy night shift to do, but something about him made her stay. "Your daughter is stable," she said. "She came in earlier tonight. Car accident. She wasn't driving, she was a passenger. Broken wrist, minor concussion. She's going to be okay." The breath he let out was so quiet she almost missed it, but she didn't miss it. "She asked for me?" His voice was flat, controlled, but his hands, resting on the blanket, tightened slightly. "A nurse on that floor said she woke up and asked if her father had been called. Someone found your number in her phone under—" Cora paused. "Under Sparrow's dad." The silence that followed was the kind that fills a room completely. "That's what she named the contact," he said. "That's what she named the contact." He turned his face toward the window. Outside, the rain was still coming down, streaking the glass in long silver lines. His jaw was set, his profile was sharp and still, and Cora Penning, who had seen a lot of people receive a lot of different kinds of news in this building, understood that she was watching a man feel something he hadn't let himself feel in a very long time. She didn't say anything, she just stayed. After a while, he said, "She's 13 now." "I know," Cora said. "I saw her chart. She was 6 when—" He started again. "She was 6 the last time I saw her." 7 years is a long time, Cora said. "Not a judgment, just a fact," offered quietly. "Yeah," he looked back at her. "It is." What happened over the next 6 hours was not the kind of thing that was supposed to happen. Carrick Malone was not supposed to end up talking to a nurse he'd never met about a daughter he hadn't seen in 7 years. He was not supposed to tell her about the way Natalie, Sparrow, used to fall asleep in the car, how she'd tip sideways and rest her head on his shoulder, how he'd drive 20 minutes past their exit just to let her sleep a little longer. He was not supposed to admit that he had, at various points over the past 7 years, driven past her school in Portland just to see the building, that he knew what grade she was in, that he'd memorized her school schedule from a document he'd obtained through means that were not entirely legal, and Cora Penning was not supposed to stay. She checked on other patients, she did her rounds, but she kept coming back to his room, and each time she did, he was still awake, still sitting up, and somewhere around 3 a.m. She pulled the chair close and they talked like two people who had somehow managed to skip all the preliminary parts and land directly in the kind of conversation that usually takes years to arrive at. "Why didn't you fight for visitation?" she asked. "Because I knew what I was," he said. "What I am. And I knew that having her close to that." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "But you drove past her school." "Yeah. That's not someone who doesn't want to be a father." He looked at her steadily. "It's someone who knows the difference between wanting something and deserving it." Cora was quiet for a moment. Then, "Who decides what you deserve?" He didn't answer that, but she could tell the question landed somewhere it wasn't supposed to. At 4:15 a.m., a nurse from the 4th floor came down and said that the girl in 4 North was awake and calm and had asked again, quietly, but clearly, whether her father had come. Carrick Malone pulled the IV out of his own arm with the casual efficiency of someone who had done it before, which Cora was pretty sure was a violation of at least 4 hospital protocols. "You can't," she started. "I'm going up," he said. She stood in the doorway of his room and watched him walk to the elevator in his rumpled wool coat, steady on his feet now, moving with the kind of contained purpose that she suspected was simply how he moved through the world. Then she went back to her rounds. She had 7 other patients and 4 hours left on her shift. She didn't expect to see him again. That was the logical assumption. Man has a health incident. gets stabilized, reconnects with his strange daughter, goes back to whatever life had produced him. Cora had learned a long time ago not to get attached to the people who moved through this building. They came in at their worst and most vulnerable, and then they got better, and then they left. That was the nature of the work. 2 days later, the hospital's administrative office received a donation, a significant one, directed specifically toward the pediatric neurology unit, where a lot of the children with serious head injuries were treated. No name attached, just a bank transfer and a note that said, "For the kids who need more time." The head of administration assumed it was an anonymous philanthropist. Cora, when she heard about it, had a different suspicion. She didn't say anything. 4 days after that, she was leaving her shift at 7 a.m., walking through the hospital's parking structure with her keys in her hand and her coat collar turned up against the cold, when a black SUV pulled up alongside her and stopped. The window came down. Carrick Malone looked at her from the driver's seat. He was dressed differently now, still the dark coat, but under it a charcoal sweater, and he looked like he'd actually slept, which changed his face somewhat, made him look less like a man holding himself together by pure force of will. "I wanted to say thank you," he said. "In person." Cora glanced around the parking structure. "You waited in a parking garage for me?" "I arrived 4 minutes ago. I knew your shift ended at 7. "How did you know my shift ended at 7? He didn't answer that immediately, which was, she would come to understand, its own kind of answer with Carrick Malone. He knew things. That was simply a fact about him, the way some people were tall or had a gift for languages. "You stayed," he said. "When I was in that room. You didn't have to do that, and you stayed." Cora leaned against the concrete pillar next to her car and looked at him. "How's your daughter?" Something crossed his face. She's going to be okay. Her mother flew in from Portland." He paused. "She let me sit with her for 2 hours. That's good. She called me Dad," he said. It came out quietly, like something he was still getting used to hearing. "She called me Dad." Cora didn't say anything. Some moments were too significant to push words into. "Anyway," Carrick said. He cleared his throat. "I wanted to say thank you." "You're welcome," Cora said. She picked up her keys. "Drive safe, Mr. Carrick," he said. "Just Carrick." She nodded. "Drive safe, Carrick." She walked to her car. She heard the SUV idle for a moment, then pull away. She sat in the driver's seat for a full minute before she started the engine. His people noticed, of course. They noticed everything. That was their job. To notice, to catalog, to report back to the man at the top of the structure about anything that seemed unusual or out of pattern. And Carrick Malone visiting Meridian General Hospital on a Tuesday night, without his security detail, was unusual. Carrick Malone showing up in the parking structure of a hospital at 7 in the morning to speak to a nurse was significantly more unusual. The man who ran his security, a broad-shouldered former military contractor named Sayers, brought it up 2 days later. "The nurse," Sayers said. "Cora Penning. You want us to look into her?" Carrick looked up from the papers on his desk. "No, she's a civilian. She knows your face now." "She knew my face when I was flat on the floor of her lobby," Carrick said. "She didn't make any calls she wasn't supposed to make. She didn't tell anyone who I was. She stayed and she helped and then she went back to work." He turned back to the papers. "Leave her alone." Sayers didn't push it. He had worked for Carrick long enough to know which silences meant the discussion was over. What Sayers didn't know, what no one in Carrick's organization knew, was that Carrick had pulled Cora Penning's employment file himself. Not to investigate her, not to assess her as a potential risk. He'd read it the way you read something you keep thinking about and can't entirely explain. Cora Penning, 26. Nursing degree from University of Illinois, Chicago. 2 years at Meridian General, high performance reviews, noted by 2 attending physicians as exceptionally calm under pressure. Grew up in Joliet, 30 miles southwest of Chicago. Father, unknown. Mother, Sandra Penning, deceased. The date listed was 12 years ago, which meant Cora had been 14. Raised herself, more or less. Put herself through school on scholarships and shifts at a diner in Joliet, and a level of quiet determination that the file didn't explicitly state, but that came through anyway, in the absence of family connections, in the lack of any institutional safety net, in the simple fact that she had built a life for herself out of what she had. which apparently wasn't much. He set the file down. He thought about a girl who had been 14 years old and alone and had still managed to become someone who stayed when it would have been easier to walk past. He thought about Sparrow. He called his daughter 2 weeks after that night at the hospital. A real call, not a text, not a message passed through her mother's attorney. He sat in his car outside his building in the dark, and he dialed the number that had been listed in her phone as Sparrow's dad, and he waited. She answered on the third ring. "Hi," she said. Her voice was cautious, but she'd answered. "Hi, it's—" He stopped. He'd been about to say, "It's your father," and the formality of it stopped him cold. "It's me," he said instead. A pause. Then, "I know. How's your wrist? The cast comes off in 3 weeks. Another pause. "Did you really drive up from Chicago to come see me in the hospital?" "Yeah. Mom said you collapsed in the lobby." "I was," he almost said fine, which was a reflex, a habit. He stopped himself. "I hadn't slept. I drove straight there." He heard her breathing on the other end of the line. Then, quietly, "Why didn't you call first? I didn't think I'd get there if I thought about it too long." The silence that followed was long, but it was a different kind of silence than the ones he was used to. It was a silence that had something in it. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay, okay, you can call me." He sat in his car for 10 minutes after they hung up. The city moved around him. Headlights, voices, the distant sound of a train. He didn't move. He thought about calling someone to tell them. He had very few people in his life he would have told something like this to. He found himself, unexpectedly, thinking about a nurse with steady hands and a direct way of asking questions. He went back to Meridian General 3 weeks later. Not because he needed medical attention. He walked into the lobby at 6:30 in the morning with a paper bag from a bakery 2 blocks away. The kind of place that opened at 5 and smelled like coffee and something warm and specific, the smell of mornings that were going somewhere. He asked the woman at the front desk if Cora Penning was still on shift. The woman looked at him for a moment. He understood that look, the slight wariness that landed on his face when people looked at him long enough, the way his presence had a tendency to make rooms adjust slightly, and then picked up the phone. Cora came down 7 minutes later. She stopped when she saw him, took him in, the bag, the lobby, the fact of him being there at 6:30 in the morning. "You're not sick," she said. "No, then what?" "I brought breakfast," he said. "You have 30 minutes before your shift ends," I thought. He stopped. He was not a man who often found himself uncertain of how to finish a sentence. "I thought maybe you'd eaten in the cafeteria long enough." Cora looked at the bag. Then at him. "You brought me breakfast. And coffee, there's coffee." She was quiet for a moment. Something moved across her face that she seemed to actively decide about, weighing it. Then she said, "There's a break room on the 3rd floor that's usually empty at this hour." He followed her up. They ate. He had coffee. She had a croissant and said it was the best croissant she'd had in years, which was such a simple and direct thing to say that it made him laugh. A real laugh, not the polite professional kind. She looked slightly surprised when he laughed. He suspected it surprised him too. He told her about the phone call with his daughter. Not all of it. He wasn't built for all of it. Not yet. But the part where she'd answered. The part where she'd said okay. Cora set down her coffee cup and looked at him with the same direct steadiness she'd had when she knelt next to him on the lobby floor. "She answered," Cora said. "Yeah," she answered. And she didn't hang up. "No, that's not nothing," Cora said. "That's actually really big." He looked down at his coffee. "I know. You're going to mess it up sometimes," she said. "That's just what happens when you're rebuilding something after a long time. You're going to say the wrong thing or not say the right thing, and it's going to feel like you lost 10 feet of ground." She paused. "But you keep calling. Have you done this?" he asked. "Rebuilt something?" She was quiet for a moment. "I rebuilt myself," she said. "After my mom died. I was 14. I sort of had to learn how to be a person without a map." She tilted her head slightly. "It's slow, but it works." He thought about her employment file. He thought about 14 and alone and still becoming this, still becoming someone who stayed. "Cora," he said. "Yeah, I'd like to have breakfast with you again." She looked at him for a long moment. He could see her thinking, not panicking, not performing, just actually thinking, weighing it out clearly and honestly, the way she seemed to do everything. I know who you are, she said. I don't mean your name. I mean what you are. I'm not naive, I know. I'm not interested in your world, she said. I'm not interested in learning about it or being adjacent to it or any of that. I understand. But, she said, you came back here for breakfast, not for anything else. And you drove yourself here instead of sending someone. She looked at him. That means something. What does it mean? She picked up her coffee again. It means I'll think about breakfast. He almost smiled. Almost, that's all I'm asking. 2 months passed. They were not easy months. Carrick's world did not slow down, simply because something in him had shifted. The territory required management. A dispute with a supply organization out of Memphis required 3 weeks of careful negotiation, and a new assistant district attorney in Chicago was asking questions that were pointed enough to require attention. He handled it all. He always handled it. But he called Sparrow every Sunday. That was the thing that held the shape of those months. Every Sunday at 7 p.m., he sat somewhere quiet and he dialed, and she answered, and they talked. About school, she was in 8th grade, had a history teacher she thought was brilliant, had developed an obsession with competitive chess. About Portland, which she described with the particular affection of someone who'd grown up somewhere and absorbed it without knowing it. About nothing important sometimes, just the shape of ordinary days. She called him Carrick, not Dad. He didn't push it. He figured she'd find her own way to whatever word fit. And Cora. He brought breakfast to Meridian General 4 times in those 2 months. She brought him coffee once, arriving at the building where he worked in her regular clothes on a Wednesday afternoon. She hadn't told him she was coming, and the look on Sayer's face when he appeared in the doorway with a woman in scrubs holding a thermos was something Carrick would have paid money to photograph. She says she knows you, Sayers said. She does, Carrick said. She'd sat across from him in his office, which was not the kind of office that usually had nurses in it, and she'd looked around at the room with an expression that was curious rather than impressed or frightened, and she'd said, "It's not what I expected. What did you expect?" "I don't know. More leather, a safe behind a painting." He'd laughed again. That was still surprising, how she made him do that. The call came on a Thursday in February. It was Sparrow's mother, her voice tight and controlled in the way that meant something had happened, and she was working very hard to manage her own fear before she could speak. "She's missing," she said. "She didn't come home from chess club. That was 3 hours ago." Carrick was on his feet before the sentence finished. He did not panic. Panic was a luxury he could not afford and had trained himself out of years ago. What he did instead was move, efficiently, quickly, through every channel he had, pulling every contact, activating every resource. He was on a plane to Portland within 90 minutes. What emerged over the next 4 hours was a picture that made his blood run cold. Sparrow had stayed late at school for chess club. That much was confirmed. She had left the building with another student, a boy in her grade she knew casually. Security footage showed them walking toward the street, and then it showed something else. A gray sedan that pulled up, a door that opened, and Natalie, Sparrow, who had stepped forward because she recognized the man in the car. Carrick watched that footage in a Portland police station with 2 detectives and Sayers, and the very careful, very deliberate understanding that whoever had taken his daughter had done so because of who he was, because of the Memphis situation, because someone had decided that the fastest way to end a negotiation was to find the one thing Carrick Malone had left that mattered enough to use as leverage. His hands, flat on the table in front of him, did not shake, but the detective sitting across from him, who had been in law enforcement for 22 years and had interviewed a lot of people in a lot of difficult situations, said later that he had never in his career seen anything quite as frightening as Carrick Malone being completely, entirely still. He found her in 11 hours. He would never describe exactly how, because the how involved resources and methods that no one in official law enforcement needed to know about. What mattered was that she was in a warehouse outside of Portland, cold, frightened, her phone smashed, but physically unharmed. The 2 men who had taken her had not anticipated how quickly Carrick would move, or how many people he could move with him. He walked into that warehouse, and she was sitting in a corner with her knees pulled to her chest and her eyes were dry, She had already cried and run through the fear to the other side, into a kind of hard quiet that he recognized, because he had done that himself a long time ago. When she saw him, her face changed. "Dad," she said, not Carrick, "Dad." He crossed the room and he knelt down and he held her for a long time without saying anything. Her arms went around his neck and she was shaking now, the shaking that comes when the fear finds somewhere safe enough to finally show itself. "I knew you'd come," she said into his shoulder. He couldn't speak for a moment. "Yeah," he managed. "Yeah, I was always going to come." He made a decision in the car on the way back from Portland. Not immediately, he let it settle for 2 days the way he let every significant decision settle. He didn't trust anything that he hadn't tested from multiple angles. But this one held up from every direction he pushed it. He called a meeting. Not the kind of meeting that happened in his building, but a very different kind. The kind where you sit across from the men who share the structure with you and you lay something on the table that cannot be taken back. "I'm stepping back," he said. The room was quiet. "Not immediately. It takes time to do this correctly, and it's going to be done correctly. But I'm stepping back. I have a daughter who is 13 years old, and who now knows exactly what her father's world costs, and I'm not willing to let her carry that weight for the rest of her life." There were questions. There were objections. There were men in that room who believed this was a temporary reaction to a traumatic week, and that, in 6 months, he would reconsider. He let them speak. Then he explained, quietly and with great precision, why they were wrong. He had always been better at convincing people than arguing with them. The process took 4 months. It was not smooth, but it held. He told Cora about it, on a morning in March, in the break room on the 3rd floor of Meridian General, with coffee going cold between them, because they'd been talking for an hour and forgotten about it. "You're actually stepping back," she said. "I already have, mostly." She looked at him carefully. "What does that look like? For someone like you?" "Different," he said. "Quieter. I have money. A significant amount of money, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I have property. I can be, I don't know how to describe it. A person, maybe. A father. Something simpler than what I've been." "Simple isn't so simpler," she said. "I know." She was quiet for a moment, turning the cup in her hands. "Sparrow called me," she said. "Did you know that?" He hadn't known that. "No, she got my number from your phone." A slight smile. "She said you talk about me." He didn't say anything to that, which was more of an answer than anything he could have said. "She told me," Cora said carefully, "that when she was in that warehouse, scared and alone, she thought about 2 things. First one was you coming to find her." She paused. "Second was the fact that you had someone in your life now who made you laugh." The break room was very quiet for a moment. Outside the door, the hospital hummed along, the same way it always did, full of people at their most vulnerable, most human, most real. "She's coming to Chicago this summer," Carrick said. Her mother agreed. 6 weeks, that's good," Cora said. "She asked if she could meet you." Cora looked up. "I said I'd ask," he said. "I'm not assuming anything. I know what I've been, and I know that's not a small thing to walk toward. But I'm telling you this honestly, because that's the only way I know how to do things." Cora set down her cup. Outside, the March sky was pale gray, the tail end of a Chicago winter that had gone on long enough. "You drove yourself to the hospital," she said. "The night I met you. You didn't send anyone." "Yes. And you brought breakfast." "Yes. And when your daughter was in danger, the thing you couldn't get rid of, the thing that kept you going, was getting back to her." She looked at him steadily. "That's who you are, Carrick. Under everything else. That's who you are." He was quiet. "Tell Sparrow," Cora said, "that I'd like to meet her too. There is a particular kind of courage in the people who stay. Not the dramatic, visible kind. Not the people who run into burning buildings or stand in front of crowds. The ordinary kind. The kind that says, 'I see you at your worst, and I'm still here.' The kind that shows up in a hospital break room before 7 in the morning with bad cafeteria coffee and the patience to sit with someone who doesn't yet know how to let himself be known." Cora Penning never asked Carrick Malone to be a different person. She asked him, in her quiet and direct way, to be more fully the person he already was, the one underneath the structure, underneath the weight, underneath the years of becoming something hard and necessary and costly. and Carrick Malone, who had spent 20 years being very good at a life that asked everything of him, and gave back very little he could hold on to, found, in the most unlikely of places, the thing he hadn't known he was still looking for. Not absolution, not redemption in the dramatic, cinematic sense, just a reason to come back. Just someone who called him by his name like it was a simple thing, like it didn't carry all that weight. Just a girl in Portland who, when she saw him walk through a warehouse door, said Dad like she'd been saying it her whole life. The rain finally stopped, sometime in April. Chicago does that, keeps you in the gray long enough that you forget there's another kind of morning. And then one day the sky is just blue, wide open blue, and the city looks like it's been washed clean, and you step outside and think, okay, here we are. Carrick walked out of his building on a Tuesday morning and called his daughter, and she answered on the second ring, and somewhere across the city, a nurse with steady hands was finishing her shift and walking out into the same blue sky. He thought, that's enough, that's more than enough. And for the first time in a very long time, it actually was. So, did any part of this story hit different for you? Was it the moment Sparrow called him Dad in that warehouse? Or was it Cora showing up to his office with coffee, completely unannounced, like she already knew she belonged there? Drop it in the comments. I want to know which moment got you. And if you're new here, welcome to Ava's Romance Library. Hit subscribe, because every week we have a new story, and some of them are going to wreck you in the best possible way. Like this video if you want more, and I'll see you in the next one.